Tonight, we're going to spend some time in the world of the medieval peasant. As the day slowly fades away and the sounds of modern life begin to quiet, imagine yourself stepping backward through the centuries. Leave behind paved roads, electric lights, smartphones, and the endless stream of information that fills our days. Allow yourself to drift into a very different world. A world where most people never traveled more than a few miles from where they were born. A world where survival depended on the weather, the harvest, and the goodwill of powerful people. Tonight, we will explore why life was often so difficult for medieval peasants. Not through the stories of kings and queens. Not through great battles or famous castles. Instead, we will quietly follow the ordinary men, women, and children who made up the overwhelming majority of medieval society. These were the people who planted the crops, tended the animals, repaired the roads, baked the bread, and carried the burdens of everyday life. Their names were rarely written down. Their stories were seldom recorded. Yet without them, medieval civilization could not have existed. So find a comfortable position. Allow your breathing to slow. And let us begin our journey. Imagine that it is early morning in a small village somewhere in medieval Europe. The year is perhaps 1250. The exact location does not matter very much, because countless villages looked remarkably similar. The first thing you notice is the darkness. True darkness. Not the darkness of a modern city, where distant streetlights glow against the horizon. This darkness feels deep and complete. The stars stretch across the sky with astonishing clarity. The Milky Way appears like a pale river flowing overhead. For a few moments, the village lies silent. Then a rooster crows. Soon another answers. A dog barks somewhere in the distance. A baby begins crying inside a small cottage. The day is beginning. Inside one of the village homes, a peasant family slowly wakes. The house is small. Very small by modern standards. Its walls are made from wooden beams packed with mud and straw. The roof is thatched with dried reeds or straw. The floor is simply packed earth. There are no soft carpets. No comfortable mattresses. No central heating. No glass windows. The family sleeps close together. Not because they necessarily enjoy doing so, but because space is limited and warmth is precious. The winter nights can be brutally cold. Even during other seasons, the dampness of the countryside finds its way into every corner of the home. The peasant opens his eyes. He has worked hard for most of his life. His hands are rough. His back often aches. His future is uncertain. But there is no time to rest. There is always work waiting. Always. This is one of the first reasons why life was miserable for medieval peasants. Work never truly ended. Modern people often think of work as something that happens during certain hours. A shift begins. A shift ends. But medieval peasants lived in a world where survival itself was work. Fields needed tending. Animals needed feeding. Tools needed repairing. Firewood needed collecting. Water needed carrying. Food needed preparing. Clothing needed mending. The tasks continued day after day, season after season. A single missed opportunity could have serious consequences. A neglected field might produce a poor harvest. A sick animal might die. A damaged roof might leak during heavy rain. Every task mattered. As dawn approaches, the family prepares for another long day. Breakfast is simple. Perhaps coarse bread. Maybe a thin porridge made from oats or barley. Sometimes there is cheese. Sometimes not. Sometimes there is ale. Even children often drank weak ale, because clean water was not always reliable. The meal is not particularly enjoyable. It is fuel, nothing more. For many peasants, hunger was a constant companion, not necessarily starvation, although starvation certainly occurred. Instead, many lived in a state that modern people would recognize as chronic undernourishment. Food supplies could be unpredictable. One bad harvest could create enormous problems. Two bad harvests could bring disaster. A cold spring, a summer drought, excessive rain, an outbreak of crop disease. Any of these could threaten the village's food supply. Today, if crops fail in one region, food can often be transported from somewhere else. In medieval Europe, such solutions were limited. Transportation was slow. Roads were poor. Trade networks were restricted. When local harvests failed, local people suffered. And sometimes they suffered terribly. As the sun rises higher, villagers begin moving toward the fields. This journey is familiar. They have walked these paths thousands of times. The fields stretch across the countryside in long strips. Most peasants do not own large amounts of land. In many cases, they work land controlled by a lord. This arrangement creates another major hardship: limited freedom. Many medieval peasants lived under systems that tied them closely to the land. Their obligations varied depending on time and place. Some had more rights. Others had fewer. But many owed labor payments or services to local lords. Imagine spending days working not only for your own survival, but also for someone else's wealth. A portion of your harvest may go to the lord. Additional taxes may be collected. Fees may be charged for using mills, ovens, or other facilities. Every season brings new obligations. For the peasant, the burden can feel endless. The work itself is physically exhausting. There are no tractors, no combines, no modern machinery. Every task depends on human effort or animal power. Fields must be plowed by hand-guided equipment. Seeds must be planted carefully. Weeds must be removed. Harvests must be gathered manually. Hours pass beneath the sun. The work is repetitive, demanding, and relentless. In spring, the ground must be prepared. In summer, crops require constant attention. In autumn, harvest season becomes a race against time. In winter, repairs and maintenance continue. There is no true off-season, no vacation, no retirement plan waiting at the end. Life is labor, and labor is life. As midday approaches, the peasant pauses briefly. Perhaps he sits beneath a tree. Perhaps she shares bread with family members working nearby. The meal remains simple: bread, cheese, on fortunate days, perhaps a little meat. Contrary to popular imagination, many peasants did not eat large amounts of meat regularly. Livestock represented wealth. Animals provided milk, labor, wool, and other valuable resources. Slaughtering them was often reserved for special circumstances. Most meals relied heavily on grains. Bread became the foundation of daily nutrition. Yet even bread varied greatly. The wealthy enjoyed fine white loaves. Peasants typically consumed darker, coarser varieties. Sometimes flour quality declined during difficult years. People mixed whatever ingredients they could find. The goal was simple: fill empty stomachs and survive until tomorrow. But survival was never guaranteed. Disease lurked everywhere. This is perhaps one of the greatest hardships of medieval life: the constant presence of illness. Modern medicine offers treatments that medieval people could scarcely imagine. Antibiotics, vaccines, surgical techniques, advanced diagnostics. None of these existed. A small infection could become deadly. A minor injury could turn serious. A fever could inspire genuine fear. Parents knew that children might not survive to adulthood. Families experienced losses that would seem unimaginable today. Many mothers faced dangers during childbirth. Many infants never reached their first birthday. Death was familiar, not unusual, not distant. It was woven into everyday life. The villagers understood this reality. Funerals were part of community life. Church bells sometimes announced another passing. People mourned, grieved, and continued working, because survival required it. The fields could not wait. The animals could not wait. Life moved forward regardless of personal tragedy. And perhaps that was one of the cruelest aspects of all. Even sorrow had little time to rest. The afternoon sun hangs quietly above the fields. The work continues. For the medieval peasant, there is rarely a moment when responsibilities completely disappear. Even when muscles ache and hands grow blistered, there is another task waiting just beyond the horizon. As the day stretches onward, imagine the weight of uncertainty pressing upon every decision. Modern people often assume that tomorrow will arrive with familiar comforts. Food will be available in stores. Clean water will flow from taps. Emergency services can be called when something goes wrong. For medieval peasants, such certainty did not exist. Every season carried risks. Every year brought unknown challenges. A promising spring could be followed by a devastating summer drought. A healthy cow might suddenly become ill. A storm could flatten crops that had taken months of labor to grow. One of the greatest hardships of peasant life was the lack of control. People worked tirelessly, yet many of the forces that determined their fate remained completely beyond their influence. The weather did not care how hard they worked. The seasons did not negotiate. Nature followed its own rules. And nature could be unforgiving. Dark clouds gathering on the horizon often brought more than rain. They brought anxiety. A powerful storm might flood fields. Strong winds could damage crops. Hail could destroy entire harvests in a matter of minutes. Imagine watching months of labor disappear beneath a violent summer storm. Imagine knowing that your family's food supply depended on those fields. Such events occurred throughout medieval Europe. Entire communities sometimes faced hardship because of weather they could neither predict nor prevent. As the afternoon progresses, children can be seen working alongside adults. Modern childhood is often associated with education, toys, and leisure activities. Medieval childhood looked very different. Children became contributors to the household from an early age. Young boys might help care for animals. Young girls often assisted with household tasks. Both learned skills necessary for survival. Fetching water, collecting firewood, gathering eggs, watching livestock, helping during harvest. These responsibilities were not optional. Every member of the family played a role. A peasant household functioned like a small economic unit. Everyone worked. Everyone contributed. Everyone depended on one another. The concept of childhood as a protected stage of life was far less common than it is today. Children grew up quickly. Life demanded it. Many learned early that comfort was rare and hardship was normal. Yet despite these challenges, moments of happiness still existed. Laughter could be heard during village gatherings. Children played games when opportunities arose. Families shared stories around fires. People found joy where they could. This is important to remember. Medieval peasants were not constantly miserable. They were human beings. They loved. They hoped. They celebrated. but their lives unfolded beneath conditions that modern people would often find extremely difficult. As shadows begin to lengthen across the countryside, another challenge becomes apparent: physical exhaustion. Most peasant labor required immense amounts of energy. Consider something as simple as carrying water. Today, clean water is often available within a few steps. For many medieval families, obtaining water required daily effort. Trips to wells, streams, or communal water sources consumed valuable time and energy. Every bucket had weight. Every journey required effort. Now imagine performing countless similar tasks every day. Chopping wood, grinding grain, repairing fences, hauling supplies, digging ditches, lifting stones, walking long distances. The human body was the primary machine of medieval society, and machines eventually wear down. Many peasants developed chronic pain long before reaching old age. Joints stiffened, backs weakened, hands became permanently roughened. Injuries accumulated over time. There were few effective treatments. Most simply endured. Pain became another ordinary part of life. As evening approaches, villagers gradually leave the fields. The walk home feels slower. The day's labor has drained much of their energy. Yet the workday is not truly finished. Not even close. Back at home, animals still need attention. Chickens must be secured, livestock checked, tools stored, food prepared, clothing repaired. The household remains busy. Smoke rises from cottage chimneys. The smell of cooking drifts through the village. Simple meals are prepared over open fires. Cooking itself can be surprisingly difficult. Maintaining a fire requires constant effort. Fuel must be gathered. Wood must remain dry. Meals require planning. Nothing is wasted. Food scarcity has taught generations to use every available resource. Bones become broth. Vegetables are stretched across multiple meals. Leftovers are carefully preserved. Waste is a luxury few can afford. Inside the cottage, the family gathers together. The room is dimly lit. Perhaps a small fire flickers nearby. Perhaps a candle burns softly. Light itself is precious. Modern people rarely think about illumination. A simple switch floods a room with brightness. Medieval families lived differently. After sunset, darkness returned quickly. Candles cost money. Oil lamps required fuel. Most activities became difficult once daylight disappeared. The rhythm of life followed the sun. When darkness arrived, the world grew smaller. The family may spend time talking quietly. Stories pass from one generation to another. Many people cannot read. Books are rare and expensive. Knowledge travels through conversation. History lives in memory. Local legends survive through storytelling. Children listen carefully. These stories entertain. They educate. They preserve traditions. In a world without television, radio, or internet, storytelling becomes one of humanity's oldest forms of connection. Yet even during these peaceful moments, worries remain. The future is uncertain. Winter may be approaching. Taxes may be due. The harvest may not be sufficient. A family member may be ill. An animal may be struggling. Financial security, as modern people understand it, scarcely exists. A single setback can create enormous hardship. Many peasant households live dangerously close to survival's edge. There is little margin for error, little room for unexpected problems. This constant vulnerability creates a kind of invisible stress, a stress that never fully disappears. even on good days, even during successful harvests, even during celebrations. The possibility of hardship always waits nearby. As night settles across the village, another reality of medieval life emerges. The cottages themselves are far from comfortable. The small home that shelters a family may also shelter animals during colder months. This arrangement provides warmth, but it also creates challenges. The air can become smoky. Odors linger. Space feels crowded. Privacy is extremely limited. Most modern people enjoy rooms dedicated to specific purposes. Bedrooms, living rooms, bathrooms, kitchens. Medieval peasants often shared a much smaller space for nearly every aspect of life. Sleeping, eating, working, living, all occurred within a confined environment. Winter conditions could make matters worse. Cold winds found their way through gaps in walls. Rain sometimes leaked through roofs. Moisture collected in corners. The concept of a warm, perfectly insulated home belonged to a distant future. People adapted because they had no alternative. Yet adaptation did not eliminate discomfort. Nighttime itself carried dangers. Without modern policing or emergency services, communities often relied on local vigilance. Travel after dark could be risky. Roads were poorly maintained. Bandits occasionally threatened travelers. Wild animals remained a concern in some regions. The darkness beyond the village boundary felt mysterious, unpredictable, sometimes frightening. For many peasants, the village represented safety. Beyond it stretched a larger world they would rarely see. This limited mobility created another hardship. Most people remained close to their birthplace throughout their lives. Travel was difficult, expensive, time-consuming. Many peasants never visited a major city, never saw a distant kingdom, never traveled beyond neighboring communities. Their world was often measured in miles rather than continents. Opportunities were limited by geography. Dreams were constrained by circumstance. Birth frequently determined destiny. A child born into a peasant family was likely to remain within that social position. Social mobility existed, but it was uncommon. The structure of society encouraged stability rather than movement. People generally lived where they were born, worked where they were born, and often died where they were born. To modern listeners, this can feel surprisingly restrictive. Today, people routinely relocate for education, employment, or personal preference. Medieval peasants possessed far fewer choices. Choice itself was often a luxury. As the fire burns lower and the family prepares for sleep, fatigue settles over the cottage. Bodies that have labored since dawn welcome rest. Yet sleep is not always peaceful. The bedding is simple. The room may be cold. Insects can be a nuisance. Animals make noise. Weather rattles the structure. Comfort remains imperfect. Still, exhaustion eventually wins. Eyes close. Breathing slows. The village becomes quiet once more. But while the family sleeps, the challenges of medieval life do not disappear. They merely wait for morning. Tomorrow will bring another day of labor, another day of uncertainty, another day of endurance. And perhaps nowhere is this reality more visible than in the ever-present influence of disease, famine, and fear, forces that could transform ordinary hardship into genuine catastrophe almost overnight. The village sleeps beneath a canopy of stars. A cool breeze drifts across the fields. The cottages stand quietly in the darkness, their thatched roofs outlined against the faint glow of the moon. For a few hours there is peace. Yet even in sleep, the medieval peasant remains vulnerable to forces beyond human control. A distant cough echoes from one cottage. In another, a child stirs restlessly with a fever. Elsewhere, an elderly villager struggles to breathe through the night. These small moments remind us of one of the harshest realities of medieval life. Disease was everywhere, and very few people truly understood why. Today, when someone becomes ill, doctors can often identify the cause. Microscopes reveal bacteria. Laboratories analyze blood samples. Medical science explains how diseases spread. But medieval peasants lived in a world where such knowledge did not exist. Illness often seemed mysterious. A healthy person could become sick without warning. A strong worker could suddenly weaken. A child could appear perfectly fine one day and be gravely ill the next. Without modern understanding, many communities tried to explain disease through religion, superstition, environmental conditions, or simple observation. Some explanations were surprisingly thoughtful. Others were completely inaccurate. Yet regardless of the explanation, the outcome remained the same. People suffered, and many died. Imagine living in a village where even minor injuries could become life-threatening. A small cut obtained while working in the fields might become infected. Without antibiotics, the body's ability to fight infection became the deciding factor. Sometimes people recovered. Sometimes they did not. The uncertainty itself was frightening. There was no emergency room, no ambulance, no pharmacy stocked with medicine. Instead, people relied on local remedies, herbal treatments, religious faith, and hope. Hope was often the most abundant resource available. As dawn begins to approach once more, let us consider another challenge that haunted medieval communities. Famine. Few words inspired more fear. A poor harvest could create discomfort. Several poor harvests could create disaster. Entire villages depended on successful agriculture. When crops failed, food supplies shrank rapidly. Prices increased. Families began rationing what little they had. Meals became smaller, then smaller still. Eventually, hunger could become a daily reality. The human body can endure hunger for a remarkable amount of time. But prolonged hunger changes people. Energy declines. Strength fades. Immune systems weaken. Illness becomes more dangerous. Work becomes harder. The cycle feeds itself. The weaker people become, the more difficult it is to recover. For medieval peasants, famine represented one of the greatest threats imaginable. Unlike modern shortages, which are often addressed through transportation and trade, medieval communities frequently faced crises with far fewer options. Food simply could not move quickly enough across great distances. Roads were poor. Transportation was slow. Storage methods were limited. Entire regions could suffer simultaneously. And when famine arrived, it left scars that lasted for generations. Stories of difficult years passed from parents to children. Memories of hunger became part of family history. Even decades later, elderly villagers might recall seasons when survival seemed uncertain. As sunlight begins to illuminate the horizon, smoke once again rises from cottage chimneys. Another day begins. The villagers wake. And with the new day comes another challenge. Taxes. To modern listeners, taxes may seem like an ordinary part of life. But for many medieval peasants, obligations to various authorities could feel overwhelming. Depending on the region and period, peasants might owe labor services, portions of crops, fees, rents, or other payments. The details varied enormously across medieval Europe. Yet the underlying reality remained consistent. A significant share of what peasants produced often went elsewhere. Imagine spending months growing crops, working from sunrise to sunset, battling weather, pests, and exhaustion, then watching part of that harvest leave your possession. The burden could be difficult to bear, especially during years when resources were already limited. The peasant understood that failure to meet obligations might carry consequences. Therefore, even when food was scarce, duties often remained. Responsibility did not disappear simply because circumstances became difficult. This created another layer of pressure within everyday life. Not only must a family survive, they must also satisfy expectations imposed by others. As the morning progresses, villagers spread across the countryside once again. Some head toward fields, others tend livestock, others repair structures damaged by weather. Life is a constant sequence of responsibilities. Yet there is another aspect of medieval hardship that modern people rarely consider: the physical environment itself. Today, many people spend much of their lives indoors. Climate-controlled buildings shield them from heat, cold, rain, and wind. Medieval peasants experienced nature far more directly. When summer temperatures rose, there was no air conditioning. When winter storms arrived, there was no central heating. Rain-soaked clothing, snow-blocked pathways, mud transformed roads into exhausting obstacles. Seasonal changes shaped daily existence in profound ways. Winter could be especially difficult. Food supplies dwindled. Days grew shorter. Temperatures dropped. Travel became more challenging. Livestock required additional care. Every task seemed harder. Imagine waking before sunrise on a freezing winter morning. The air inside the cottage feels nearly as cold as the air outside. Your hands ache from the chill. Your breath is visible. Yet work still awaits. Animals must be fed. Water must be fetched. Repairs must be made. The season offers no exemptions. Survival remains a full-time occupation. Many medieval people viewed winter with a mixture of respect and apprehension. It tested communities. It exposed weaknesses. It reminded everyone how fragile life could be. Yet spring always returned. And with spring came hope. Hope was one of the most valuable resources medieval peasants possessed. Because despite all the hardships, people continued planning for the future. They planted crops. They built homes. They married. They raised children. They invested effort into lives that remained uncertain. This persistence reveals something remarkable about human nature. Even under difficult conditions, people seek meaning. They form relationships. They build communities. They create traditions. And medieval villages were rich with tradition. Throughout the year, religious festivals and local celebrations provided moments of relief. These occasions broke the routine of daily labor. People gathered together. They shared food. They exchanged stories. They participated in rituals that connected generations. For a brief time, worries could fade into the background. Laughter filled spaces usually occupied by work. Music echoed through village streets. Children played games. Neighbors strengthened bonds. Such moments mattered enormously, because without them, the hardships of everyday life might have felt unbearable. Community acted as a form of survival. People depended on one another. When a roof required repair, neighbors might help. When a family suffered misfortune, others could provide assistance. When harvest season arrived, cooperation increased efficiency. Life remained difficult, but few people faced it entirely alone. This sense of collective responsibility became one of the strengths of village life. And yet, community could also create challenges. Privacy was limited. Everyone knew everyone else's business. Rumors spread quickly. Conflicts sometimes lingered for years. Disagreements over land, livestock, or resources could strain relationships. Living in close proximity meant that cooperation and tension often existed side by side. The same neighbor who helped repair your roof might also become involved in a dispute over property boundaries. Human nature has not changed very much across the centuries. Where people gather, both friendship and conflict inevitably appear. As the day moves toward afternoon, imagine the countless worries occupying a peasant's mind. Will the crops survive? Will the family remain healthy? Will winter be harsh? Will taxes increase? Will livestock remain productive? Will enough food be stored? These concerns accompany every season, every year, every stage of life. And unlike many modern anxieties, these worries often involve basic survival. The stakes are extraordinarily high. Failure is not merely inconvenient. Failure can be catastrophic. Perhaps this helps explain why medieval life often appears so exhausting when viewed from a modern perspective. Not because every moment was miserable, not because people lacked happiness, but because the margin between security and disaster remained incredibly thin. A successful harvest might create stability. A failed harvest might threaten survival. A healthy year could strengthen a family. An outbreak of disease could destroy it. Life existed in a constant state of uncertainty. And uncertainty is tiring. It drains the mind even when the body is resting. As afternoon sunlight glows across the fields once more, the villagers continue their work. The rhythm remains familiar. Plant, repair, carry, build, harvest, endure. Tomorrow will bring similar tasks. Next week will look much the same. Next year may as well. For many peasants, life followed patterns established long before they were born. Patterns that would continue long after they were gone. Yet within those patterns existed countless personal stories. Stories of courage. Stories of love. Stories of sacrifice. Stories of resilience. Because surviving medieval life required resilience above all else. And in the next part of our journey, we will explore some of the most difficult realities of aging, family life, and the constant struggle against time itself in the medieval world. The afternoon slowly gives way to evening once again. Long shadows stretch across the fields. The sounds of work gradually soften as villagers begin making their way home. A cart creaks along a muddy path. A flock of geese wanders through the village center. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rings gently through the cool air. Another day is ending. Another day survived. For the medieval peasant, survival itself was often considered an accomplishment. Not because life was filled with constant danger every moment of every day, but because the challenges never truly disappeared. Each year brought new obstacles. Each season introduced fresh uncertainties. And as people grew older, many of those difficulties became even harder to bear. Let us spend some time considering what aging meant in the medieval world. Today, many people imagine old age as a period of retirement, a time when work slows down and responsibilities gradually decrease. For most medieval peasants, such a concept barely existed. There were no pensions, no retirement accounts, no social security systems, no nursing homes. Most people continued working as long as their bodies allowed. And when their bodies could no longer keep pace, life often became increasingly difficult. Imagine spending decades laboring in fields, decades lifting heavy loads, walking long distances, working through rain, heat, cold, and exhaustion. The human body keeps score. By the time many peasants reached later adulthood, their joints were worn. Their backs ached constantly. Their eyesight often declined. Their hearing weakened. Simple tasks that once seemed effortless required increasing effort. Yet the need for food remained. The need for shelter remained. The need to survive remained. An elderly peasant could not simply stop living because work had become painful. Life demanded continued effort. Family members frequently became the primary source of support. Multiple generations often lived closely together. Grandparents, parents, and children shared responsibilities. This arrangement offered advantages. Older individuals could contribute wisdom, experience, childcare, and household assistance. Younger relatives provided physical strength. The family functioned as a support system long before modern social programs existed. But even strong families faced limitations. Resources were often scarce. Food supplies could be uncertain. Every additional mouth required additional food. This reality sometimes created difficult situations. Aging could become frightening because dependence increased while resources remained limited. Many elderly peasants worried about becoming burdens. They understood how difficult life already was for younger generations. And yet they had little choice. Everyone eventually grows older. Everyone eventually weakens. Time spares no one. As evening settles over the village, imagine a grandmother sitting beside the fire. Her hands reveal a lifetime of labor. Her face bears the marks of countless seasons spent outdoors. She remembers harsh winters, failed harvests, years of abundance, years of scarcity. She remembers people who are no longer alive. Friends lost to illness, children lost too young, neighbors carried away by misfortune. In medieval communities, death was a familiar companion, not because people welcomed it, but because they encountered it frequently. Life expectancy statistics often create misunderstandings. Many medieval people who survived childhood could live into middle age or beyond. However, mortality rates remained significantly higher than those experienced in most developed nations today. Infant mortality was especially devastating. Many families experienced the loss of children. The emotional pain of such losses must have been immense. Parents loved their children then just as deeply as parents do now. The idea that medieval families cared less because death was more common is not supported by historical evidence. Human emotions have changed remarkably little. People grieved. They mourned. They cried. They suffered. The difference was that loss occurred more frequently. And because it occurred more frequently, people often developed ways of coping that seem unfamiliar to modern observers. Religious faith frequently played an important role. Faith provided explanations, comfort, hope, community. The church occupied a central position in many medieval villages. Its influence extended far beyond religious ceremonies. The church often served as a gathering place, a social center, a source of guidance, a keeper of records, a symbol of stability in an uncertain world. For peasants facing hardship, faith offered something precious: meaning. When crops failed, when disease spread, when loved ones died, people searched for understanding. Religious beliefs helped many navigate experiences that otherwise seemed overwhelming. Whether attending services, observing holy days, or participating in local traditions, villagers often found comfort in shared spiritual practices. These practices connected individual to something larger than themselves. And in difficult times, that connection could be deeply reassuring. As darkness deepens outside, let us consider another challenge of medieval family life. Marriage. Modern marriage is often viewed primarily as a personal choice based on affection and compatibility. Medieval marriages could certainly include love. Many undoubtedly did. But practical considerations frequently played a significant role. Marriage created partnerships necessary for survival. Running a household required cooperation. Fields required labor. Children required care. Resources required management. A successful marriage strengthened the economic stability of the family. An unsuccessful one created difficulties for everyone involved. Life offered little room for prolonged personal conflict. Too much depended on teamwork. Husbands and wives often worked side by side throughout the day. Both contributed substantially to household survival. Women performed an enormous range of responsibilities: cooking, cleaning, childcare, food preparation, textile production, gardening, animal care, and often agricultural labor as well. The workload was immense. In many ways, every adult member of a peasant household lived under constant pressure. There was always another task waiting, always another responsibility demanding attention, always another problem requiring a solution. As the fire crackles softly, imagine the daily routine of a medieval mother. She rises before sunrise, prepares food, manages household duties, cares for children, works alongside family members, repairs clothing, collects water, maintains the home, and then repeats many of those tasks the next day. And the next, and the next. Her labor may not always appear in official records, but it was absolutely essential. Without it, the household could not function. Without it, survival itself became more difficult. One of the reasons medieval life appears so exhausting is because nearly every necessity required direct human effort. Today, machines perform countless tasks. Washing machines clean clothing. Refrigerators preserve food. Dishwashers save time. Vacuum cleaners simplify cleaning. Vehicles reduce travel time. Electricity powers endless conveniences. Medieval peasants possessed none of these advantages. Everything required labor. Everything required time. Everything required energy. The cumulative effect was enormous. Even routine activities consumed hours. A task that takes 5 minutes today might require an hour in the medieval world. Life moved more slowly. Yet paradoxically, people often worked harder simply to maintain basic living conditions. Outside, the village grows quiet. Most families have settled indoors. The stars return overhead. The darkness deepens. And somewhere beyond the village, wolves may be moving through distant forests. Their presence reminds us that nature remained far closer to daily life than it does for many people today. Wild animals still occupied large portions of Europe. Forests stretched across vast landscapes. Travelers often encountered environments that felt untamed. The boundary between civilization and wilderness seemed less secure. This proximity to nature created both beauty and danger. The medieval peasant experienced breathtaking sunrises, clear night skies, ancient forests, rolling fields, but they also experienced harsh winters, predators, storms, crop failures, floods, In droughts, nature provided life. Nature threatened life. Both realities existed simultaneously. As midnight approaches, the village sleeps once more. Families rest beneath simple roofs. Children dream quietly. The fire fades into glowing embers. For a few precious hours, work pauses. The burdens of the day temporarily disappear. Yet tomorrow will arrive soon. The rooster will crow. The fields will wait. The animals will need feeding. The chores will begin again. And the endless cycle of medieval peasant life will continue. In the next part, we will explore some of the darkest threats medieval peasants faced: plague, war, violence, and the terrifying events that could transform an ordinary village into a place of fear almost overnight. A pale mist hangs over the countryside. The village remains quiet for a few moments before the first signs of movement begin to appear. Smoke rises slowly from a chimney. A rooster announces the coming day. Somewhere a wooden door creaks open. Life begins again. For countless generations of medieval peasants, mornings often arrived with a mixture of hope and concern. Hope because a new day offered opportunities. Concern because nobody knew what troubles the day might bring. The uncertainty of life extended far beyond weather and harvests. There were darker dangers as well. Dangers capable of transforming an ordinary year into a nightmare. Among those dangers, few inspired more fear than disease outbreaks. Long before modern medicine, communities lived with the constant possibility that illness could spread rapidly from person to person. Villagers did not understand bacteria. They did not understand viruses. They did not possess microscopes. They could observe symptoms. They could recognize patterns. But the true causes remained hidden. Imagine hearing rumors that sickness has appeared in a nearby town. At first, the reports seem distant. Someone becomes ill. Then another. Then dozens. Travelers bring unsettling stories. Merchants whisper alarming news. Nobody knows exactly what is happening. Nobody knows whether the disease will arrive in your village. Yet anxiety begins spreading long before the illness itself. People watch neighbors carefully. A cough suddenly seems more concerning. A fever becomes more frightening. Every symptom carries uncertainty. The medieval world contained many diseases, some relatively common and others devastatingly severe. Periodic epidemics could sweep across entire regions. Communities sometimes lost significant portions of their populations. Fields went untended. Businesses closed. Families were shattered. Even after an outbreak ended, the emotional scars often remained for years. The fear itself became part of daily life. Not necessarily every day. Not necessarily every year. But always somewhere in the background. A reminder of how fragile existence could be. As villagers work in the fields, another threat occasionally enters their thoughts. War. Popular movies often focus on knights charging into battle. Colorful banners fluttering dramatically in the wind. Heroic speeches. Epic victories. For ordinary peasants, war usually looked very different. War often meant disruption, destruction, uncertainty, and fear. Most peasants had little influence over political decisions. Kings, nobles, and rulers determined military campaigns. Yet the consequences frequently fell upon ordinary people. Armies required food. Armies required supplies. Armies moved across landscapes inhabited by civilians. Imagine hearing that soldiers are approaching the region. You do not know whether they are friendly. You do not know whether they will respect local property. You do not know how long they will remain. Your crops stand in nearby fields. Your animals represent valuable resources. Your family's survival depends upon those resources. Suddenly, everything feels vulnerable. Even when armies behaved relatively well, their presence created enormous strain. Food supplies diminished. Prices increased. Travel became dangerous. Normal routines were interrupted. And when conflicts intensified, the consequences could become severe. Villages might be damaged, fields abandoned, families displaced. Years of hard work could disappear within weeks. For peasants who had spent decades building modest lives, such losses were devastating. One of the cruelest aspects of war was its unpredictability. A village might enjoy peace for generations, then suddenly find itself caught in larger events beyond its control. People who had never traveled far from home could find their lives transformed by political decisions made hundreds of miles away. This lack of control appears repeatedly throughout peasant life. Weather, disease, taxes, conflict. Again and again, major events unfolded beyond the influence of ordinary people. Yet despite this reality, communities continued. They rebuilt. They adapted. They endured. Human resilience is one of history's most remarkable qualities. As afternoon sunlight warms the countryside, let us consider another source of anxiety: crime. Modern societies devote enormous resources to law enforcement. Police departments, courts, investigative systems, communication networks. Medieval villages possessed far fewer tools. Most communities relied heavily upon local cooperation and informal systems of accountability. People knew one another. Reputations mattered. Community pressure often played an important role in maintaining order. But crime still existed. Theft occurred. Disputes escalated. Violence sometimes erupted. Travelers occasionally faced danger on isolated roads. A merchant journeying between towns could encounter robbers. A farmer transporting goods might worry about theft. Even within villages, conflicts over land, animals, or resources sometimes created tension. For people living close to subsistence, the loss of property could have serious consequences. Stealing a modern convenience is one thing. Stealing a family's only cow is something else entirely. The cow may provide milk. The cow may help plow fields. The cow may represent a substantial portion of household wealth. Its loss could threaten survival. This reality helps explain why disputes over property were often taken seriously. Resources were limited. Every possession mattered. As evening approaches, the village begins settling into familiar routines. Yet another challenge remains ever present: fire. Modern people often underestimate how dangerous fire once was. Today, building materials, fire departments, alarms, and safety regulations reduce many risks. Medieval villages possessed none of these protections. Most structures contained large amounts of wood. Many roofs consisted of highly flammable thatch. Open flames were used for cooking, heating, and lighting. The ingredients for disaster were everywhere. A single accident could become catastrophic. A spark escapes from a hearth. A candle tips unexpectedly. A cooking fire spreads. Suddenly, flames leap from one building to another. Strong winds accelerate the destruction. Neighbors rush to help. Buckets of water are passed from hand to hand. People attempt to save belongings. Animals panic. Smoke fills the air. Entire sections of a village can disappear within hours. For communities already living near the edge of survival, such events were devastating. Homes represented years of labor. Tools represented economic security. Food stores represented future survival. Losing these resources could create long-lasting hardship. And yet fire remained necessary. People could not simply eliminate open flames. They depended on them. This constant balancing act between necessity and danger characterized much of medieval life. The very things people needed often carried risks. Animals provided food but required care. Fields produced crops but depended on favorable weather. Fire offered warmth but threatened destruction. Life involved continuous trade-offs. As darkness settles over the village once more, the sounds of the day begin fading away. The field stands silent. The roads grow empty. Families gather indoors. And for a brief time, attention shifts away from survival toward something equally important: connection. Despite all the hardships we have discussed, medieval peasants were not isolated individuals struggling entirely alone. They belonged to families, communities, networks of relationships. People celebrated weddings. They welcomed newborn children. They attended festivals. They shared meals. They exchanged stories. These moments mattered, perhaps more than we sometimes realize, because happiness does not require perfect circumstances. Human beings have always found ways to create meaning, even during difficult times. A simple gathering with neighbors. A successful harvest after a challenging year. A child's laughter. A warm fire during winter. These experiences offered comfort. They reminded people that life contained more than hardship. Even in an era marked by uncertainty, moments of joy remained possible. Perhaps that is one reason medieval communities endured for centuries. Not because life was easy, but because people continued finding reasons to keep going. Reasons to hope. Reasons to work. Reasons to believe that tomorrow might be better. As the stars emerge overhead and another day comes to an end, we are left with a deeper understanding of why life was often miserable for medieval peasants. The endless labor, the uncertainty, the disease, the hunger, the taxes, the vulnerability to forces beyond their control. All of these burdens shaped daily existence. And yet there is still more to explore. Because some of the greatest struggles were not physical at all. They existed inside the mind. Inside fears, beliefs, superstitions, and anxieties that followed people even into the quiet hours of the night. And that is where our journey will continue next. Night settles gently across the village. The last traces of daylight disappear beyond the horizon. A few faint lights flicker behind shuttered windows. The countryside becomes quiet. Not silent. Never truly silent. A dog barks somewhere in the distance. Wind brushes against the thatched roofs. An owl calls from the edge of a nearby forest. The sounds are subtle, soft. Yet for medieval peasants, nighttime often carried a very different feeling than it does today. Modern cities glow through the darkness. Streetlights illuminate roads. Electric lights push back the night. Most people can step outside after sunset and still see their surroundings clearly. The medieval peasant lived in a world where darkness felt far more complete, far more mysterious, and often far more frightening. When the sun disappeared, familiar landscapes transformed. Paths became difficult to follow. Fields vanished into shadow. Forests seemed deeper, larger, more threatening. Human imagination filled the darkness with possibilities. Some possibilities were real. Others existed only in stories. But all of them influenced daily life. As villagers gather around small fires inside their homes, stories begin to circulate. Stories passed down through generations. Stories about strange events. Stories about mysterious creatures. Stories about spirits, omens, and warnings. To modern listeners, many of these tales may sound like simple folklore. Yet for medieval people, the boundary between the natural and supernatural often felt less certain. The world seemed full of unseen forces. Many events lacked scientific explanations. Disease appeared suddenly. Storms arrived unexpectedly. Crop failures occurred without warning. In the absence of modern knowledge, people searched for meaning wherever they could find it. Superstitions developed naturally. Certain animals became associated with good fortune. Others became symbols of bad luck. Unusual weather patterns attracted attention. Strange dreams were remembered. Unexpected events inspired concern. None of this meant medieval peasants were foolish. Far from it. Many possessed practical intelligence developed through years of experience. They understood agriculture, animal care, construction, seasonal patterns, survival skills, but they lived in a world where many mysteries remained unsolved. Human beings naturally create explanations when explanations are unavailable. And so beliefs emerged. Some comforting, some frightening. Imagine lying awake in a small cottage on a windy night. The fire has nearly burned out. Rain taps softly against the roof. The darkness presses against the walls. You hear an unfamiliar sound outside. Perhaps it is nothing. Perhaps it is an animal. Perhaps it is simply the wind. Yet uncertainty encourages imagination. And imagination can be powerful. For many medieval peasants, fear did not always come from visible dangers. Sometimes it came from the unknown. The things that could not be easily explained. The things hidden beyond sight. This psychological burden added another layer to everyday life. People worried not only about practical concerns, but also about symbolic ones. An unusual event might be interpreted as a warning. A difficult season might be viewed as a sign. The search for meaning became part of daily existence. And perhaps that is understandable. After all, uncertainty is uncomfortable. Human beings prefer explanations. Even imperfect explanations often feel better than none at all. As midnight approaches, let us consider another aspect of medieval life that modern people sometimes overlook. Loneliness. At first glance, loneliness may seem unlikely. Villages were close-knit communities. Families often lived together. People worked alongside neighbors. Yet loneliness can exist even when others are nearby. The medieval world offered limited opportunities for personal choice. Many people followed paths largely determined by birth. Opportunities were constrained. Dreams were restricted. Choices were limited. A young person might spend years imagining a different life. A life involving travel, adventure, opportunity. Yet such possibilities often remained out of reach. The village represented the center of existence. For some, this provided comfort. For others, it may have felt confining. History rarely records such personal feelings. Ordinary peasants left behind few written documents. But human nature suggests that curiosity existed then, just as it exists now. Some people undoubtedly wondered about distant cities, distant kingdoms, distant worlds. Most would never see them. Travel remained difficult, expensive, and often dangerous. The horizon represented possibility, yet it also represented limitation. As the hours pass, the village remains asleep. Tomorrow's responsibilities wait patiently. The fields, the animals, the chores, the endless cycle continues. And yet there is another challenge that deserves our attention. Education, or more precisely, the lack of educational opportunities available to many peasants. Today, education is considered a fundamental part of life in many societies. Children attend school for years. Books are widely available. Information flows freely. The medieval peasant experienced something very different. Literacy rates were generally low among rural populations. Books were expensive. Handwritten manuscripts required enormous effort to produce. Knowledge often remained concentrated among religious institutions and educated elites. This does not mean peasants lacked knowledge. Quite the opposite. Many possessed extensive practical expertise. They knew how to grow crops, care for animals, predict weather changes, repair tools, preserve food, construct buildings. These skills represented valuable forms of knowledge. But access to formal education remained limited. The ability to read and write could open doors. Yet those doors were unavailable to many. This restriction contributed to broader social inequalities. Knowledge often translated into influence. Influence often translated into opportunity. And opportunity was not evenly distributed. A peasant child born into a rural village faced a very different future than a child born into wealth. Again, we encounter a recurring theme. Birth shaped destiny. Not completely, but significantly. Modern societies are far from perfect. Yet many people today possess opportunities that would have seemed extraordinary to medieval peasants. The ability to travel, to study, to choose careers, to access information instantly. These freedoms were largely unimaginable for most rural villagers. As dawn begins its slow return, the first faint hints of light appear on the horizon. The stars gradually fade. The village prepares to awaken once more. Another day approaches. Another opportunity to work, to endure, to survive. And perhaps that word, survive, is the key to understanding medieval peasant life. Much of daily existence revolved around survival. Not luxury, not comfort, not self-fulfillment. Survival. Food needed to be secured. Shelter maintained. Families protected. Resources managed carefully. Every decision carried consequences. Every season introduced new challenges. Every year tested resilience. Yet despite everything we have explored, medieval peasants continued building lives. They fell in love, raised children, created traditions, shared stories, laughed with friends, celebrated festivals, mourned losses, dreamed about the future. In other words, they remained deeply human. Their hardships were immense, but so was their capacity to endure. And in the next part of our journey, we will explore the changing seasons of medieval life, spring, summer, autumn, and winter, and discover how each season brought its own unique struggles, fears, routines, and demands upon the ordinary peasant. As the first light of dawn spreads across the countryside, the medieval village slowly awakens once more. A thin layer of mist drifts over the fields. Birds begin singing from hedgerows and trees. The air feels cool and fresh. For a brief moment, the world seems peaceful. Yet every medieval peasant understands that the seasons are always moving forward. Time never pauses. Nature never rests. And each season brings its own challenges. To understand why life was often miserable for medieval peasants, we must understand the seasons that govern nearly every aspect of their existence. Unlike modern life, where technology allows people to remain relatively independent of seasonal changes, medieval life was deeply connected to the natural world. The calendar was not merely a way of measuring time. It was a survival guide. Every month mattered. Every season demanded preparation. And every mistake carried consequences. Let us begin with spring. After a long winter, spring often arrived as a welcome sight. The snow melted. The frozen ground softened. The days gradually became longer. For many villagers, spring brought a sense of relief. The worst of winter had passed. The countryside slowly returned to life. Yet spring was not a season of rest. Far from it. Spring was a season of urgency. Fields needed preparation. Seeds needed planting. Tools required repair. Animals required attention. The success of the coming harvest depended heavily on work completed during these critical weeks. Imagine walking into the fields before sunrise. The soil is damp beneath your feet. The air still carries traces of winter's chill. There is much to do, and little time to waste. The entire village becomes busy. Men, women, and children contribute wherever possible. Everyone understands the importance of the season. A delayed planting could reduce yields. Poor preparation could affect the entire year. Spring offered hope, but it also demanded effort. Enormous effort. As weeks pass, green shoots begin appearing across the countryside. The landscape transforms. Fields that seemed lifeless during winter now pulse with growth. Animals produce young. Birdsong fills the air. Nature appears generous. Yet appearances can be deceiving. Spring also introduces new uncertainties. Unexpected frosts can damage crops. Heavy rains can flood fields. Diseases may spread among livestock. The season remains unpredictable. Hope and anxiety exist side by side. For medieval peasants, this balance becomes familiar. Good fortune is always accompanied by concern. Success is never guaranteed. As spring gradually gives way to summer, the workload intensifies. Summer is often imagined as a pleasant season. Warm sunshine, blue skies, long days, and certainly medieval peasants appreciated good weather. But summer also brought exhausting labor. The days became longer. The temperatures increased. Work continued from early morning until evening. Imagine spending hour after hour beneath the sun. Sweat drips from your forehead. Your muscles ache. Dust clings to your clothing. There are no air-conditioned buildings waiting nearby. No cold beverages stored in refrigerators. No convenient escapes from the heat. The work simply continues. Fields require constant attention. Weeds compete with crops. Animals must be managed carefully. Repairs must be completed. Summer becomes a race against time. Every day matters. Every task matters. And because daylight lasts longer, many people work longer hours. The season that appears beautiful from a distance often feels exhausting from within. There is another challenge that accompanies summer. Water. Periods of dry weather can create significant problems. Streams shrink. Pastures suffer. Crops struggle. The fear of drought begins creeping into conversations. Villagers watch the sky carefully. Each cloud attracts attention. Each rainfall brings relief. The dependence upon weather remains complete. No irrigation systems stretch across vast fields. No advanced forecasting predicts future conditions. People wait, observe, hope, and work. Always work. As summer reaches its height, the countryside buzzes with activity. Fields sway in the wind. Grain ripens beneath the sun. The harvest approaches, and with it comes one of the most demanding periods of the entire year. Autumn. For medieval peasants, autumn is both rewarding and terrifying. Months of labor have led to this moment. The harvest determines survival. A successful harvest provides security. A poor harvest creates anxiety. Everyone understands the stakes. Imagine the village during harvest season. The atmosphere feels urgent. Workers move quickly through the fields. Every available hand contributes. Children assist. Elderly villagers help where they can. The community becomes focused on a single objective. Gather the crops. Gather them before storms arrive. Gather them before they spoil. Gather them before disaster strikes. Long days become even longer. People rise before sunrise. They work until darkness. Fatigue becomes unavoidable. Yet there is little choice. The harvest cannot wait. Nature follows its own schedule. And humans must adapt. The pressure is immense. A sudden storm could damage crops. Heavy rain could delay work. Unexpected setbacks create panic. The entire year's effort hangs in the balance. When the harvest succeeds, relief spreads throughout the village. Food stores begin filling. Granaries become crowded. Families feel a sense of security. For a brief time, optimism grows. Perhaps this winter will be manageable. Perhaps the food will last. Perhaps the coming months will be kind. But medieval peasants know better than to celebrate too confidently. Winter is approaching, and winter has a way of testing every assumption. The arrival of winter transforms the countryside. Leaves disappear from trees. Fields become quiet. Temperatures fall. Days grow short. The landscape feels different. Colder, harsher, more demanding. Winter represents one of the greatest challenges of medieval life. Food supplies are no longer growing. They are being consumed. Every meal reduces reserves. Every week brings the village closer to spring. But spring still feels far away. Imagine waking before dawn during January. The cottage is cold. The fire has nearly died. The darkness lingers. Outside, frost covers the ground. Your breath forms small clouds in the air. The day begins with discomfort, and often continues that way. Simple tasks become more difficult. Water may freeze. Travel becomes challenging. Roads turn muddy or icy. Animals require additional care. Firewood disappears rapidly. Everything takes more effort. Everything consumes more energy. And all the while, people worry about supplies. Will the food last? Will the livestock survive? Will illness spread? Will the weather worsen? Winter encourages these questions. Because winter exposes weaknesses. A family that prepared well may endure comfortably. A family that experienced a poor harvest may struggle. The difference between security and hardship becomes painfully visible. For some villagers, winter feels endless. The cold settles into bones. The darkness affects moods. Opportunities for outdoor work diminish. People spend more time indoors. More time waiting. More time hopping. Yet winter also reveals another side of medieval life. Resilience. Communities gather together. Families share resources. Neighbors assist one another. Stories are told around fires. Traditions continue. People endure because they must. And because they always have. Year after year. generation after generation. The seasons continue their endless cycle. Spring brings hope. Summer brings labor. Autumn brings pressure. Winter brings endurance. And through it all, the medieval peasant adapts, works, struggles, survives. The seasons do not care about human plans. They do not pause for exhaustion. They do not reward effort automatically. Yet they shape every aspect of life. Perhaps more than any king, more than any battle, more than any law. The seasons become silent rulers of the medieval world. And in the next part of our journey, we will look even deeper into the homes, clothing, food, and everyday living conditions that made ordinary peasant life far more uncomfortable than most people today can easily imagine. The seasons continue their endless journey. Spring becomes summer. Summer fades into autumn. Autumn gives way to winter. And throughout every season, medieval peasants return each evening to the same place. Home. At least what they called home. To modern eyes, many medieval peasant homes would seem remarkably small, uncomfortable, and primitive. Yet for the families who lived within them, these simple structures represented safety, shelter, and survival. As dawn breaks over another imagined medieval morning, let us step inside one of these cottages and take a closer look. The first thing you notice is the size. The structure is modest, very modest. A typical peasant family might spend nearly their entire lives within a home that would feel cramped even as a single room by modern standards. The walls are constructed using local materials. Wooden frames support panels of woven branches coated with mud, clay, and straw. The roof consists of thatch gathered from nearby fields. Everything is built using resources that can be obtained locally. Nothing is wasted. Every material serves a purpose. Yet despite the ingenuity involved, comfort remains limited. The floor beneath your feet is hard-packed earth. There are no polished wooden floors, no thick carpets, no soft rugs. Years of footsteps have worn smooth paths across the surface. Dust gathers during dry weather. Moisture seeps in during wet seasons. The floor constantly reminds its inhabitants that luxury belongs elsewhere. A small fire burns near the center of the room. Smoke rises upward toward a simple opening in the roof. At least that is the intention. In reality, much of the smoke remains inside. It drifts slowly through the cottage. It settles into clothing. It stains walls. It irritates eyes. For medieval peasants, smoky air was simply a fact of life. Many spent decades breathing smoke indoors. The consequences accumulated over time. Persistent coughing was common. Breathing difficulties often increased with age. Yet alternatives were limited. The fire was essential. It provided warmth, light, a place to cook food. Without it, survival would become far more difficult. This pattern appears repeatedly throughout medieval life. Necessity often came with discomfort. The things people needed most frequently created their own hardships. As sunlight enters through small openings in the walls, the interior becomes slightly brighter. There are no large glass windows. Glass remains expensive and uncommon in peasant homes. Instead, openings may be covered with wooden shutters or simple materials designed to keep out wind and rain. As a result, interiors often remain dim even during daylight hours. Reading, writing, and detailed work become more difficult. Daily life unfolds in an environment far darker than most modern people experience. The furniture is sparse. A rough table, a few benches, simple storage chests, perhaps a stool or two. Every object serves a practical purpose. Decorative possessions are rare. Space is too valuable. Resources are too limited. The family cannot afford unnecessary items. And so the home contains only what is needed. This simplicity may appear peaceful from a distance, yet it often reflects necessity rather than preference. The medieval peasant does not embrace minimalism because it is fashionable. The medieval peasant embraces it because alternatives are unavailable. Now let us consider clothing. Today, clothing is produced on an enormous scale. A person can purchase garments from around the world with relative ease. Fashion changes rapidly. Options seem endless. The medieval peasant lived in a completely different reality. Clothing required significant labor. Every piece of fabric represented time and effort. Wool needed processing. Fibers required spinning. Threads required weaving. Garments required sewing. Repairs demanded constant attention. Nothing was disposable. A torn shirt could not simply be replaced with a quick trip to a store. Instead, it would be patched. And patched again. And patched again. Many garments remained in use for years. Sometimes decades. Clothing often reflected practicality rather than personal expression. Durability mattered. Warmth mattered. Protection mattered. Fashion was a distant concern for people focused on survival. Imagine dressing on a cold winter morning. Your clothes are rough compared to modern fabrics. The material scratches slightly against your skin. The air inside the cottage is chilly. Layers provide some protection, but comfort remains limited. Throughout the day, clothing becomes dirty from work. Dust accumulates. Mud splashes upward from roads and fields. Sweat soaks into fabric. And because washing clothing requires substantial effort, garments are not cleaned as frequently as modern people might expect. Again, this is not laziness. It is practicality. Every task consumes time. Every task consumes energy. And energy must be used carefully. As the morning progresses, the family begins preparing food. Food, perhaps the single most important subject in the life of any medieval peasant. Modern supermarkets contain thousands of products. Fresh fruits from distant countries. Frozen meals. Packaged snacks. Countless varieties of bread, meat, and vegetables. The medieval peasant would find such abundance almost unimaginable. Food choices are limited, seasonal, local, and often repetitive. Bread forms the foundation of many meals. Day after day, week after week, month after month. The type of bread varies depending on circumstances. Some years produce better grain than others. Some families possess greater resources than others. But bread remains central. Alongside bread, peasants often consume porridge, vegetables, beans, and other simple foods. Cabbage, onions, turnips, leeks, foods that grow reliably and provide nourishment. Meat appears less frequently than modern people sometimes imagine. Animals are valuable assets. A cow provides milk. A sheep provides wool. A horse provides labor. Keeping animals alive often makes more economic sense than eating them. As a result, meat may be reserved for special occasions or fortunate circumstances. This diet supplies calories. It sustains life. But it lacks the variety many modern people take for granted. Imagine eating similar meals repeatedly throughout the year. The same ingredients, the same flavors, the same routines. For some, this familiarity offers comfort. For others, monotony. Yet choice remains limited. The peasant eats what is available. not necessarily what is desired. As noon approaches, another challenge emerges. Water. Obtaining clean water is rarely effortless. Someone must fetch it, carry it, store it, protect it from contamination. Every bucket requires labor. Every trip consumes time. The modern convenience of turning a faucet handle belongs to a future still centuries away. The physical effort involved in obtaining basic necessities accumulates throughout the day. One task alone may seem manageable, but dozens of such tasks combine to create relentless workloads. This is one reason medieval life appears so exhausting. Not because individual tasks are impossible, but because they never stop. Carry water, gather firewood, prepare food, repair clothing, feed animals, maintain shelter, work fields, repeat, day after day, year after year, generation after generation. As afternoon sunlight filters through the village, the ordinary rhythms of peasant life continue. Children assist with chores. Adults focus on work. Elderly family members contribute where they can. Everyone participates, because survival depends upon cooperation. No one carries the burden entirely alone. Yet everyone carries part of it. And perhaps that is one of the defining characteristics of medieval peasant life. The burden is shared, but it remains heavy. Very heavy. As evening approaches and smoke rises from cottage roofs once again, families gather around simple meals. They eat. They talk. They rest. For a short time, work slows. The pressures of survival ease slightly, but never completely, because tomorrow waits, and tomorrow will bring another long list of responsibilities, another series of challenges, another opportunity to endure. In the next part of our journey, we will explore one of the most difficult realities of medieval peasant life, the lack of personal freedom, the rigid social hierarchy, and the ways in which birth often determined the course of an entire human life. The evening meal has ended. The fire crackles softly. Outside, darkness slowly settles across the village. A cool wind moves through the fields, bending the tall grasses and carrying the distant sounds of animals preparing for the night. Inside the cottages, families gather together. Some talk quietly. Some repair clothing. Some simply sit in silence, exhausted from another day of labor. For a few precious hours, work pauses. Yet even during these moments of rest, another reality shapes the lives of medieval peasants. A reality less visible than hunger, less obvious than disease, but often just as powerful. The reality of limited freedom. To understand why life was often miserable for medieval peasants, we must understand the social world they inhabited. Modern societies place enormous value on personal choice. People choose careers, choose where to live, choose whom to marry, choose how to spend their time. These freedoms are so familiar that many people rarely stop to think about them. For the medieval peasant, life often offered far fewer choices. Birth played an enormous role in determining the course of a person's future. A child born into a peasant family was likely to become a peasant. A child born into a noble family was likely to become a noble. The social structure of medieval society tended to preserve itself. Opportunities for dramatic upward mobility existed, but they were uncommon. Most people lived within the social position into which they had been born. Imagine being a young boy growing up in a small village. From your earliest years, your future appears largely predictable. You will likely work the land. You will probably remain close to home. You may marry someone from a nearby community. You may spend your entire life within a relatively small geographic area. The path ahead is visible long before adulthood arrives. For some people, this predictability may provide stability. But for others, it may feel restrictive. Human beings naturally dream. They imagine possibilities. They wonder what exists beyond familiar horizons. Yet many medieval peasants possessed limited opportunities to pursue such dreams. Travel remained difficult. Education remained restricted. Resources remained scarce. The world beyond the village often felt distant and inaccessible. This sense of limitation could shape entire lives. Not because people lacked ambition, but because circumstances constrained what ambition could realistically achieve. As morning arrives once more, villagers head toward their daily responsibilities. The social hierarchy becomes visible everywhere. The village exists within a broader system of authority. Lords possess land. Officials collect obligations. Religious leaders hold influence. Peasants occupy the foundation of the structure. They produce much of the food. They perform much of the labor. Yet they generally possess less power than those above them. This imbalance creates another source of frustration. Hard work does not always lead to greater freedom. A peasant may labor tirelessly for decades, yet still remain within the same social position, still face similar obligations, still encounter similar limitations. To modern observers, this can seem discouraging. The connection between effort and opportunity often appears weaker than many people expect. Of course, medieval society was not identical everywhere. Conditions varied across regions and centuries. Some peasants enjoyed more rights than others. Some communities possessed greater independence. Some individuals achieved unusual success. History rarely conforms perfectly to simple rules. Yet the broader pattern remains. Social mobility was generally limited. Birth mattered a great deal. As the day progresses, imagine a young woman working beside her family in the fields. She is intelligent, capable, curious. She notices details others overlook. She asks thoughtful questions. She dreams about distant places she has heard described by travelers. But her opportunities remain constrained. Her responsibilities are immediate, practical, necessary. The household depends upon her labor. The village depends upon her participation. Survival leaves little room for personal exploration. Again, this is not unique to women. Men face similar limitations. Everyone exists within a system shaped by obligation. The demands of daily life consume enormous amounts of time and energy. And because survival remains the highest priority, many personal aspirations remain unrealized. This reality does not mean people lacked happiness. It does not mean they lacked meaningful lives. But it does help explain why medieval existence could feel restrictive from a modern perspective. As afternoon sunlight warms the countryside, another aspect of social life becomes apparent. Authority. Modern individuals often interact with governments indirectly. Many daily decisions occur without direct oversight from powerful figures. Medieval peasants experienced authority differently. Authority felt closer, more immediate, more visible. Local lords, officials, and institutions influenced everyday life in numerous ways. Disputes over land, questions of obligation, community regulations. Many aspects of life involved external oversight. For peasants, independence was rarely absolute. Most people operated within systems they did not create and could not easily change. This reality generated stability, but it also generated frustration. Rules could seem unfair. Obligations could feel burdensome. Decisions made by distant authorities could affect ordinary families in profound ways. Yet resistance carried risks. The balance of power rarely favored peasants, and so most adapted. They focused on survival, on family, on community, on the practical realities immediately in front of them. As evening approaches, let us consider another consequence of limited freedom: the narrowing of possibility. Modern people often measure success through personal achievement. Careers, education, travel, experiences. Medieval peasants frequently measured success differently. Success meant surviving winter, producing enough food, maintaining a healthy family, avoiding disaster, protecting resources. These goals were practical, immediate, necessary, yet they left less room for individual ambition. Life became centered on stability rather than transformation. Many people spent their entire lives working to maintain what they already possessed rather than pursuing dramatic change. This constant focus on preservation could be exhausting. Imagine carrying responsibilities that never disappear. Responsibilities inherited from previous generations. Responsibilities that will eventually pass to future generations. The cycle continues. Year after year, century after century. The fields remain. The village remains. Families come and go, but the structure persists. For many peasants, life may have felt less like a journey toward new opportunities and more like participation in an ongoing cycle. A cycle that began long before their birth and would continue long after their death. Yet within this structure, people still found meaning. They formed friendships, built families, celebrated holidays, shared traditions. Even when freedom was limited, human connection remained powerful. Perhaps this is one of history's most important lessons. People do not require perfect circumstances to create meaningful lives. The medieval peasant endured hardships that modern individuals would find difficult to imagine. Yet they continued finding reasons to laugh, reasons to hope, reasons to persevere. As the sun sinks below the horizon and another day draws to a close, the village settles into familiar routines once more. The fire glows softly. The stars emerge overhead. Families gather together. And beyond the fields, the wider medieval world continues turning. A world filled with kingdoms, castles, wars, trade routes, and rulers. A world that often depended upon the labor of ordinary peasants. People whose names history rarely remembers. People who worked quietly, endured patiently, and carried much of medieval society upon their shoulders. In the next part of our journey, we will explore how major historical events, wars, plagues, famines, and political changes affected ordinary peasants who often had little control over the forces shaping their lives. The stars fade slowly as dawn approaches. A thin band of pale light appears along the eastern horizon. The village remains quiet for a few moments longer. Then, one by one, signs of life begin to emerge. A rooster crows. A cottage door opens. Smoke curls upward from a chimney. Another day begins. For the medieval peasant, the rhythm is familiar. Work awaits. Responsibilities await. Survival awaits. Yet beyond the fields and cottages of the village, larger events are unfolding. Kings are making decisions. Armies are moving. Merchants are traveling. Religious leaders are shaping policies. And although peasants often possess little influence over these events, they are rarely protected from their consequences. One of the most difficult aspects of medieval life is this simple reality. Major historical events often arrived without invitation, and ordinary people frequently paid the price. Imagine living peacefully in a rural village. The harvest has been reasonably successful. Food stores are adequate. The community feels stable. Then rumors begin arriving from distant towns. A dispute between rulers. A conflict over territory. Political tensions. At first, such news may seem irrelevant. The village is far away from royal courts and military headquarters. But history has a way of traveling. And eventually, distant events often become local problems. War provides one example. To a king, war may involve strategy. To a noble, it may involve prestige. To a general, it may involve tactics. To a peasant, it often involves uncertainty. Imagine hearing that armies are approaching the region. Nobody knows exactly what will happen. Some soldiers may behave respectfully. Others may not. Food supplies become vulnerable. Livestock becomes vulnerable. Property becomes vulnerable. Even if a battle never reaches the village itself, the effects can still be severe. Trade routes may be disrupted. Prices may increase. Taxes may rise. Resources may become scarce. A conflict taking place miles away can still transform daily life. This lack of control creates enormous stress. The peasant did not choose the conflict. The peasant did not design the strategy. Yet the peasant may still suffer the consequences. And perhaps that is one of the recurring themes throughout medieval history. Ordinary people often bear burdens created by decisions they never made. As the morning progresses, villagers continue their work. The fields require attention regardless of political events. Crops do not pause because armies are marching. Animals do not stop needing food. Nature follows its own schedule. This creates a difficult situation. People must continue managing daily responsibilities, while also adapting to larger forces beyond their control. The pressure can be exhausting. Imagine trying to plan for winter, while rumors of conflict spread through neighboring communities. Imagine wondering whether the coming months will bring stability or disruption. Such uncertainty becomes part of everyday life. And war is only one example. There are other forces equally capable of reshaping the medieval world. Consider plague. Few words inspired greater fear. Throughout history, outbreaks of disease periodically swept across regions, leaving profound consequences behind. For medieval peasants, plague represented something especially terrifying, not only because of its deadly nature, but because it seemed impossible to predict. One day life appears normal. The next day rumors begin. A traveler becomes ill. A nearby town reports unusual deaths. Concern spreads. Then fear. Then panic. The speed of change can feel overwhelming. Imagine a village hearing reports of disease approaching. People continue working. Continue planting. Continue harvesting. Yet beneath every conversation lies a growing question. Will it reach us? Nobody knows. And that uncertainty can be almost as frightening as the illness itself. Families worry about loved ones. Neighbors watch for symptoms. Religious services become crowded with people seeking comfort. Every cough attracts attention. Every fever inspires concern. When disease arrives, daily routines collapse. Work slows. Communities struggle. Loss touches nearly every family. The emotional toll is immense. Even survivors carry memories for years afterward. The fear lingers long after the immediate danger passes. As afternoon sunlight brightens the countryside, let us consider another challenge. Famine. Unlike war or plague, famine often develops gradually. At first, the signs seem manageable. A poor harvest, unusual weather, rising prices, reduced food supplies. But over time, these problems accumulate, and eventually they become impossible to ignore. Imagine opening a storage chest and realizing supplies are disappearing faster than expected. Imagine calculating how much food remains, how many weeks it might last, how much uncertainty lies ahead. These concerns occupy people's thoughts constantly. Food is not merely a convenience. It is survival. When food becomes scarce, everything changes. Work becomes harder. Illness becomes more dangerous. Stress increases. Communities become vulnerable. The human body depends upon nourishment. Without it, resilience begins to fade. For medieval peasants, famine was not an abstract concept. It was a real possibility. A threat that could emerge after a series of unfortunate events. A threat capable of transforming ordinary hardship into genuine catastrophe. As the day moves toward evening, another historical reality deserves attention. Taxes and obligations often increased during difficult periods. Rulers needed resources. Governments needed revenue. Military campaigns required funding. Public projects required labor. These demands frequently reached ordinary villagers. Imagine already struggling through a difficult year. The harvest has been disappointing. Resources are limited. Then additional obligations arrive. The burden becomes heavier, not because anyone intends cruelty, but because larger systems continue operating. And those systems often depend upon contributions from people with the fewest resources available. This imbalance can feel deeply frustrating. The people working hardest frequently remain the most vulnerable. And yet they continue, because there is little alternative. The fields still need planting. The roofs still need repair. The animals still need care. Life moves forward regardless of circumstances. Perhaps this is why resilience appears again and again throughout peasant history. Resilience is not optional. It is necessary. Without resilience, survival becomes impossible. As twilight approaches, let us pause for a moment and consider something remarkable. Despite wars, despite plagues, despite famines, despite hardship, medieval villages endured. Not every village, not every family. History contains countless tragedies. Yet many communities survived generation after generation. They rebuilt after disasters, recovered from losses, adapted to changing conditions. The ability of ordinary people to continue moving forward under difficult circumstances remains one of the most impressive aspects of human history. Modern people often admire kings, generals, explorers, and rulers. Yet medieval civilization depended just as much upon anonymous farmers, anonymous laborers, anonymous families, people whose names disappeared from historical records, people who woke before sunrise, worked until exhaustion, and quietly sustained entire societies. As darkness returns and stars begin appearing overhead once more, the village settles into evening. The fields grow silent, the roads empty. Families gather around fires. Children listen to stories. Adults discuss the events of the day. And somewhere beyond the horizon, history continues unfolding. New conflicts emerge. New rulers rise. New challenges appear. But here in the village, life remains focused on simpler concerns. Food, family, shelter, survival, the essentials. And perhaps that is the deepest truth about medieval peasant life. Most people were not thinking about grand historical events every day. They were thinking about tomorrow's work, tomorrow's meal, tomorrow's weather, because survival demanded attention, constant attention. In the next part of our journey, we will explore one of the most overlooked aspects of medieval life, the emotional world of ordinary peasants, their fears, hopes, dreams, friendships, love, and the surprisingly human experiences hidden beneath centuries of hardship. The village rests beneath a blanket of stars. The day's work has ended. The animals have been fed. The tools have been stored away. The fields stand quiet in the darkness. Inside the cottages, small fires glow softly, casting flickering shadows across rough wooden walls. For a few hours, the demands of labor loosen their grip. The endless cycle pauses. And during these quiet moments, we can begin exploring something that history books often overlook: the emotional lives of medieval peasants. When people imagine the Middle Ages, they often focus on castles, battles, kings, and plagues. Even when peasants are discussed, they are frequently described in terms of work, poverty, and hardship. Yet medieval peasants were far more than workers struggling to survive. They were human beings, complex human beings. They experienced fear, hope, love, jealousy, friendship, grief, joy, curiosity, and countless other emotions that remain familiar to us today. The centuries separating us may be vast, but human nature has changed remarkably little. Imagine a young man walking home after a long day in the fields. His hands ache from labor. His clothes are dusty. His stomach is hungry. Yet his thoughts are not focused entirely on work. Perhaps he is thinking about someone he hopes to marry. Perhaps he is replaying a recent conversation. Perhaps he is imagining a better future. These private thoughts rarely appear in historical records, but they almost certainly existed, because people have always dreamed, even during difficult times. As the fire crackles softly inside a cottage, imagine a family gathered together after supper. The meal has been simple: bread, vegetables, perhaps a little cheese. Nothing extraordinary. Yet the atmosphere feels warm. A child laughs at a story. Parents exchange tired smiles. An elderly grandparent shares memories of years long past. For a brief moment, hardship fades into the background. These moments matter, more than we sometimes realize. Human beings do not live on food alone. They also depend upon connection, upon belonging, upon relationships. The medieval peasant understood this instinctively. Community was not merely helpful. It was essential. Life was too difficult to face alone. Neighbors depended on one another. Families depended on one another. Friendships carried enormous value. Imagine trying to survive a harsh winter without support from those around you. Imagine facing illness without family assistance. Imagine attempting a harvest without community cooperation. Such tasks would become nearly impossible. Relationships provided practical benefits, but they also provided emotional comfort. A friend could share burdens. A spouse could offer encouragement. A neighbor could provide reassurance during difficult times. These simple forms of support help people endure extraordinary challenges. As the night deepens, let us consider another powerful emotion: fear. Medieval life contained many reasons to feel afraid. Disease, famine, war, accidents, weather, financial hardship, loss. The list seemed endless. Yet fear was not constant. People adapted. Human beings possess a remarkable ability to normalize difficult circumstances. What appears frightening from a modern perspective often felt ordinary to those living through it. A peasant might worry about the coming harvest in much the same way modern people worry about jobs, finances, or health. The details differ. The emotional experience remains recognizable. Uncertainty creates anxiety. Across centuries, that truth remains unchanged. Imagine lying awake at night during a difficult year. The harvest has been disappointing. Food stores appear smaller than expected. Winter approaches. You hear the wind outside. You stare into the darkness. And questions begin forming. Will the food last? Will the family remain healthy? Will spring arrive before supplies run out? These concerns are deeply human. They connect us directly to people who lived hundreds of years ago. As midnight approaches, another emotion enters our story. Love. History often presents medieval life as harsh and practical. And certainly, practical concerns shaped many decisions. But love existed nonetheless. People fell in love. They experienced heartbreak. They missed loved ones. They celebrated marriages. They cherished relationships. The emotional bonds between parents and children appear especially powerful. Despite the hardships of medieval life, evidence suggests that families cared deeply for one another. Parents worried about sick children. Children mourned lost parents. Families celebrated births. They grieved deaths. They supported one another through difficult times. The emotional intensity of these experiences was no less real simply because they occurred centuries ago. A mother comforting her frightened child in a medieval cottage feels instantly recognizable. A father worrying about his family's future feels familiar. A young couple dreaming about marriage feels familiar. History changes many things. Human emotion is not one of them. As the fire burns lower, imagine a young woman sitting quietly near the edge of the room. Outside, the stars shine overhead. She wonders what exists beyond the boundaries of her village. She has heard stories from travelers. Stories about distant cities, great cathedrals, bustling markets, foreign lands. She knows she may never see such places herself. Yet curiosity remains. The desire to understand the wider world appears throughout human history. Most medieval peasants possessed limited opportunities to travel. Yet that does not mean they lacked imagination. People have always wondered what lies beyond the horizon. Always wondered whether different lives might be possible. Always wondered what opportunities exist elsewhere. Curiosity is one of humanity's oldest companions. As dawn begins approaching once more, let us consider happiness. Were medieval peasants happy? The answer is complicated. There were certainly many reasons for unhappiness. Hard labor, poverty, disease, limited freedom, uncertainty. Yet happiness is rarely determined by a single factor. Human beings possess an extraordinary ability to find joy even in difficult circumstances. A successful harvest, a wedding celebration, a healthy child, a gathering of friends, a religious festival, a beautiful spring morning. These experiences brought genuine happiness. Not permanent happiness, not perfect happiness, but real happiness nonetheless. Modern people sometimes imagine that progress eliminates suffering. In reality, every era contains its own challenges. Medieval peasants faced hardships that seem overwhelming today. Yet they also experienced moments of contentment that remain recognizable. They laughed. They celebrated. They loved. They hoped. In many ways, they were not so different from us. Perhaps the greatest difference lies in the conditions surrounding those emotions. Their joys existed alongside constant uncertainty. Their celebrations occurred despite hardship. Their hopes survived in difficult circumstances. And perhaps that makes those hopes even more remarkable. As the first light of morning appears on the horizon, the village begins waking once more. The familiar cycle resumes. Doors open. Animals stir. Smoke rises from chimneys. Another day begins. Another opportunity to work. Another opportunity to survive. And another opportunity to find meaning within an often difficult world. Because beneath all the hardships we have explored, medieval peasant life was ultimately a human story. A story of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. A story of resilience. A story of endurance. A story of families and communities doing their best within circumstances they did not choose. And in the next part of our journey, we will begin bringing together everything we have learned as we explore what a full year in the life of a medieval peasant truly looked like, from the depths of winter to the final harvest of autumn. A cold wind drifts across the sleeping countryside. The stars shimmer faintly overhead. The village rests quietly beneath the darkness. Most families are asleep. The fire in each cottage has burned down to glowing embers. For now there is peace. But as we continue our journey through medieval peasant life, let us imagine something different. Let us imagine living through an entire year. Not as a king. Not as a knight. Not as a wealthy merchant. But as an ordinary peasant whose survival depends upon the land. A single year. 12 months. 4 seasons. Hundreds of challenges. Thousands of tasks. And almost no certainty about what the future holds. Our year begins in January. Winter grips the countryside tightly. The fields lie dormant beneath frost and mud. Trees stand bare against gray skies. The air feels sharp and cold. For medieval peasants, January is often a month of endurance. The great harvest of the previous autumn is long behind them. Now they must rely upon stored food. Every loaf of bread, every sack of grain, every preserved vegetable, every piece of cheese, everything has already been gathered. Nothing new is growing. The village exists on reserves. Imagine opening a storage chest. You calculate how much food remains. How many weeks are left until spring? How quickly supplies are disappearing. This becomes a constant concern. A quiet worry that follows families throughout the season. Winter teaches patience, but it also teaches anxiety. As the weeks pass, daily life becomes a struggle against cold and darkness. The sun rises late, sets early. Many mornings begin before dawn. The cottage feels chilly. The floor is cold beneath bare feet. The fire requires attention. Wood supplies shrink steadily. Every log burned today cannot be burned tomorrow. Resources must be managed carefully. Nothing can be wasted. Inside the home, repairs occupy much of the time. Clothing is mended. Tools are repaired. Equipment is prepared for the coming agricultural season. Although the fields appear quiet, work never truly disappears. There is always something requiring attention. Always something needing maintenance. Always another responsibility waiting nearby. February arrives. The days grow slightly longer. The change is subtle, almost imperceptible at first. Yet villagers notice. After months of darkness, every additional minute of daylight feels valuable. Hope begins returning. Spring remains distant, but it no longer feels impossible. The countryside still appears lifeless. Yet beneath the soil, changes are already underway. Nature is preparing, and so are the villagers. Plans are discussed. Seeds are inspected. Tools are sharpened. The community begins looking forward. Forward to warmer weather. Forward to planting season. Forward to possibility. March finally brings signs of renewal. The first hints of green appear across the landscape. Bird song becomes more frequent. Streams flow more freely. The grip of winter begins loosening. For peasants, this transition is enormously important. The agricultural year is about to begin again. The work intensifies immediately. Fields must be prepared. Animals require additional attention. Repairs must be completed before planting begins. Everyone becomes busy. The pace quickens. Spring is beautiful, but it is not relaxing. It is demanding. The success of the entire year depends upon decisions made during these critical weeks. April arrives with longer days and growing optimism. The countryside transforms rapidly. What was once gray becomes green. Trees begin producing leaves. Wildflowers appear. The world feels alive again. Yet spring weather remains unpredictable. Rain falls frequently. Fields become muddy. Unexpected frosts remain possible. Every peasant understands that appearances can be deceptive. A beautiful spring day offers no guarantees. Nature still controls the outcome, and nature often refuses to cooperate. Imagine spending hours planting seeds while watching clouds gather overhead. Will the rain help? Will it harm? Nobody knows. The uncertainty never disappears. May follows. The landscape flourishes. Crops begin growing. Animals graze in greener pastures. The village feels energetic. Hope becomes easier. Yet so does worry. The more crops grow, the more people become invested in their success. A poor field in May can create problems in September. Every stage matters. Every decision matters. The workload increases steadily. Weeds compete with crops. Fences require repair. Livestock requires management. There is little time for rest. The season that appears so peaceful from a distance is filled with labor. Then comes June. The days are long. Very long. Sunlight stretches late into the evening. Work begins early and often continues until dusk. The heat increases. Fields demand constant attention. The village enters one of the busiest periods of the year. Imagine walking through rows of crops beneath the summer sun. Sweat gathers on your forehead. Your back aches. Your hands are rough from labor. Yet the work continues. Because it must. Summer rewards effort. But only effort. July arrives. The countryside appears abundant. Fields sway gently in warm breezes. At first glance, everything seems prosperous. Yet experienced peasants know better. The harvest has not yet arrived. The food remains in the field. Anything can still happen. Storms, disease, drought, pests. Every farmer understands how quickly fortune can change. And so July becomes a month of cautious optimism. Hope tempered by experience. August follows. The tension increases. Harvest season approaches. the entire village becomes focused on preparation. Tools are inspected. Storage spaces are cleaned. Plans are made. Everyone understands what lies ahead. The harvest will determine survival. Nothing matters more. Then September arrives. And with it comes one of the most demanding periods of the year. Harvest. Long days become exhausting days. The entire community works together. Children assist. Adults labor from sunrise until darkness. Even elderly villagers contribute wherever possible. Every grain matters. Every crop matters. Every hour matters. The atmosphere feels urgent. Because weather remains unpredictable. A storm at the wrong moment could destroy months of effort. The pressure is immense. Yet when the harvest succeeds, relief spreads throughout the village. Food fills storage areas. Families begin calculating supplies. For the first time in months, genuine security feels possible. October continues the work. Late harvests are completed. Food is preserved. Wood is gathered. The village prepares for winter. Preparation becomes the dominant theme. Everything must be ready, because winter always arrives, and winter is rarely forgiving. November brings colder temperatures. The fields become quieter. Leaves disappear from trees. The countryside changes once again. People focus increasingly on indoor activities. Repairs, maintenance, preparation. The cycle begins slowing. Yet concern grows. Food stores now represent survival. There will be no second harvest. What has been gathered must last. Finally, December arrives. The year nears its end. The days become short. The nights become long. Winter settles across the land once more. The village returns to endurance mode. Families gather around fires. Stories are shared. Traditions continue. People reflect upon the year that has passed. Was the harvest successful? Did the family remain healthy? Did disaster strike? Did fortune smile upon the village? Each year tells a different story. Some years bring abundance. Others bring hardship. Most bring a mixture of both. And then, almost without noticing, the cycle begins again. January returns. The seasons continue turning. The fields wait patiently. The villagers prepare for another year. Another harvest. Another struggle. Another opportunity to survive. And perhaps that is the most important lesson of all. For medieval peasants, life was not defined by a single dramatic event. It was defined by repetition. Work repeated. Seasons repeated. Challenges repeated. Generations repeated. The cycle never truly ended. It simply continued. Year after year. Century after century. And in the next part of our journey, we will begin concluding our story by reflecting on what medieval peasants endured, what they achieved, and why their lives deserve to be remembered today. The year has come full circle. Winter has returned. The fields rest beneath the cold sky. Smoke drifts upward from cottage chimneys. The village grows quiet as evenings settle across the countryside. And now, after spending so much time among the ordinary people of the medieval world, we can begin reflecting on everything we have seen. Throughout our journey, we have followed peasants through changing seasons. We have watched them wake before dawn, walk muddy roads, work endless fields, repair homes, raise children, endure illness, face uncertainty, and somehow continue moving forward. Again and again, year after year, generation after generation. When many people think about history, they naturally focus on extraordinary individuals. Kings, queens, generals, explorers, inventors. Their names appear in books. Their portraits hang in museums. Their achievements are remembered. Yet most of history was not lived by such people. Most of history was lived by ordinary individuals whose names have long since disappeared. The medieval peasant belongs to this forgotten majority. A person whose life rarely attracted attention. A person whose daily efforts seldom appeared in written records. A person who spent countless hours performing tasks that seemed ordinary at the time. Yet without those tasks, medieval society could not have existed. Every loaf of bread began with someone's labor. Every town depended upon food produced by farmers. Every castle relied upon surrounding communities. Every kingdom depended upon people willing to work the land. The medieval peasant occupied the foundation of the entire system. And foundations are often overlooked precisely because they remain out of sight. Imagine standing on a hill overlooking a medieval landscape. In the distance, perhaps you see the tower of a church, perhaps the walls of a castle, perhaps a busy market town. These structures attract attention. They appear impressive, important. Yet scattered across the countryside are hundreds of small villages, hundreds of cottages, thousands of ordinary families, people whose labor makes everything else possible. History sometimes remembers rulers, but civilization depends upon workers. As darkness deepens outside, let us consider something else: the remarkable resilience of the human spirit. Throughout this story, we have encountered countless hardships: disease, famine, poverty, cold winters, limited opportunities, physical exhaustion, social restrictions. The list seems endless. Yet despite all of these challenges, medieval peasants continued building lives. They continued loving, continued laughing, continued dreaming. Human beings possess an extraordinary capacity for adaptation. When circumstances become difficult, people adjust. They develop routines. They create traditions. They find meaning. This ability appears repeatedly throughout history. And perhaps nowhere is it more visible than in the lives of ordinary people. Because ordinary people rarely have the luxury of escaping hardship. Instead, they learn how to endure it. Imagine a family gathered around a fire on a winter evening. The room is small. The meal is simple. Resources are limited. Yet the family feels connected. Stories are shared. Children listen. Parents smile. For a brief moment, hardship recedes into the background. These moments may seem insignificant compared to wars and political events. Yet they represent something profoundly important. They represent life itself. Not the grand events recorded in chronicles, but the quiet experiences that actually make up human existence. A conversation, a laugh, a meal, a friendship, a memory. These are the moments people carry with them. These are the moments that give life meaning. As midnight approaches, imagine walking through the sleeping village. The cottages are dark. The roads are empty. The fields stretch silently into the distance. Everything appears peaceful. Yet hidden within these simple structures are countless stories. Stories that history rarely records. A young couple planning a future together. A parent worrying about a sick child. An elderly villager remembering decades gone by. A teenager wondering what lies beyond the horizon. A farmer hoping for good weather. A widow grieving a loss. a family celebrating a successful harvest. Each story matters, even if nobody wrote it down, even if nobody remembered the names involved. Because history is ultimately the story of people. All people, not only the powerful, not only the famous, but everyone, including those who lived quiet lives in small villages centuries ago. As the hours pass and the stars move slowly overhead, let us think about how different the modern world has become. Today, many people enjoy comforts that medieval peasants could scarcely imagine. Electric light, modern medicine, instant communication, clean running water, central heating, rapid transportation, access to education, access to information. The list is extraordinary. So extraordinary, in fact, that we often forget how unusual these conveniences truly are. For most of human history, life looked much closer to the world we have explored tonight than it does to the world we currently inhabit. The medieval peasant reminds us of this reality, reminds us how much effort was once required simply to survive, reminds us how fragile life could be, reminds us how dependent people were upon weather, seasons, and circumstance. Yet the medieval peasant also reminds us of something encouraging. Human beings have always been capable of enduring difficult situations, always capable of adapting, always capable of finding hope. The conditions change, the technology changes, the challenges change, but the essential qualities remain. Courage, resilience, love, curiosity, community. These qualities connect us to people across centuries. The distance between our worlds may seem enormous. Yet in many ways, we are not so different. We worry about the future. We care about family. We seek happiness. We face uncertainty. We hope for better days. The details change. The emotions remain familiar. As dawn begins approaching for one final time, the village starts to awaken. The first rooster crows. A faint glow appears on the horizon. Another day is beginning. For the peasants living here, the routine will continue. Fields need attention. Animals need care. Meals need preparation. Life moves forward, as it always has, as it always will. And perhaps that is where we should leave our story. Not with a dramatic ending, not with a famous battle, not with a powerful king, but with an ordinary morning. Because ordinary mornings were the true heart of medieval peasant life. People waking before sunrise, people preparing for work, people doing what was necessary to survive. Quiet acts of perseverance repeated across centuries. Millions of lives, millions of stories, most forgotten, yet all important. And as the sun slowly rises over the medieval countryside, casting golden light across fields that have witnessed countless generations come and go, we can quietly say goodbye to the villagers we have come to know. Their world was difficult, often uncomfortable, frequently uncertain, and sometimes deeply miserable. Yet it was also a world filled with determination, with community, with hope, a world built by ordinary people whose labor shaped history in ways they could never fully see. And now, as the morning light grows brighter and our journey gently comes to an end, we leave the medieval village behind. The fields remain. The seasons continue. The centuries pass. And the story of the medieval peasant fades softly into history.